Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you making some time for our live Since You Ask. I think this is the first time I've hosted a talk show. They didn't teach me this in headmaster school, but we're really privileged to have with us today Ed Kinnaly, who is the CEO of Bauer and the and the parent of a current prep student. And Ed also attended St. John's for a couple of years before going back to Saugus High School, and then also being at Babson College. So our goal today is to give an opportunity for us to ask some general questions of Ed, and really appreciate you making some time for us this afternoon, Ed. I know there's a lot going on in your world, but appreciate the opportunity for you to engage with our students.
Great to be here, Doctor.
Can you talk a little bit about, you were at St. John's in the 80s, but what was it that originally brought you to St. John's, and now as a parent, what do you see as kind of the benefits of a St. John's education and a St. John's program?
My father was a school teacher on the North Shore here, and the reputation I've had, was phenomenal. He urged me to leave the institution, not only from an educational perspective, but also from, how can I put myself in a position, or how could my parents put me in a position to develop into a proper young man. I attended for 2 years. I loved it. I ended up going back to Saugus High School for a couple of different reasons, but when I got the opportunity to, with my own sons, to kind of shepherd them, St. John's was a supernatural choice, and luckily everything worked out there.
That's great. Thanks. Appreciate that. You've had some great professional experiences, Ed. You graduated from Babson, spent some time at Pepsi, at Nike, at Flywheel Sports, and now you're the CEO of Bauer. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do today as CEO of Bauer, and kind of what the day-to-day challenges and opportunities that you face, well, maybe are a little bit different now than they are when we were pre-coronavirus, but maybe a little bit about how it was like before the virus and what it's like right now as well.
Yeah, sure. So I work for a parent company is called Peak Achievement Athletics, and it's a holding company for 3 different businesses. One is Bauer Hockey, one is Maverik and Cascade Lacrosse, and the third is Easton Baseball. So I'm responsible for the management of those 3 businesses. It's interesting, of course. A lot of people think I hang out in hockey rinks and go watch the Bruins every day. I probably see 2 professional hockey games a year, because it really is a business. We distribute products in about 60 countries around the world. So I spend a lot of time on an airplane, a fair amount of time in Asia and Europe as well. It's really about working with to make sure that getting the product for our consumer base, understanding what they want, ensuring that we're allocating resources appropriately. There's ways to actually, and there's capital constraints, and there's also human resource constraint on what we can actually invest over a given period of time. So a lot of time is really spent thinking about how we best allocate resources.
Great.
I was like before the coronavirus was ahead than it is right now. We're survived well. We have a really strong balance sheet to our business, which allowed us, economic endurance to get through the situation. We're working closely with some of our partners to help them hold their hand, if you will, as they navigate through this uncertain time as well. Be as flexible, if you will, on terms and initial programs that we work with certain retailers in, because they're the livelihood of our existence.
Sure.
But we're also spending a lot of time with our employee base too, and making sure that our team feels they're being listened to, being supported in this time.
Great. One of the things that we work a lot with our students at St. John's is we talk about leadership, specifically the world of servant leadership, of influencing any situation they can for the benefit or for the good of others. You and Bauer were profiled in the Globe recently for a really innovative solution to providing personal protective equipment for medical professionals treating those affected with COVID-19. Can you talk a little bit about what went into that process, and what were the challenges, what were the opportunities, and how it's worked out?
Yeah. On the St. Patrick's Day, about 4:30 in the afternoon, I had a developer from our lacrosse team actually walk into my office, and he said, "Do you have a couple of minutes?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I want to throw a crazy idea at you." So I said, "Sure, go for it." And he did. And I said, "Do you really think we can do that?" And he said, "Yeah, 100%." I said, "Then it's not a crazy idea." I said, "What do you need from me?" He said, "I need permission to spend a little bit of money and build a prototype." And I said, "You can have all the money you want. Go and get it done." So that was really the middle of March. I would say about 36 hours later, we had a drawing of what we wanted to do and an outline of a rough business plan. And then about 12 hours after that, we had our first prototype. And really, this for me, I'm incredibly proud of what our company's been able to do, but I'm more than that, I'm incredibly proud of the people that stepped up and had the initiative to try to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we're all about. I would say that the response that we've received from a demand perspective has been overwhelming. About a week after we had the prototype, we had a strategy session on, okay, now that we know we can build these things, how much do we want to commit to from a raw material perspective? And secondly, how do we want to create awareness that we're building these for medical professionals? We initially started with a forecast of 10,000 units. We thought we could build 10,000 units and move through them. Right now, we have stopped taking orders and we're up close to 2.5 million units.
Wow.
And it was, from an awareness perspective, it took on a life of its own. We made the strategic decision, which was supported by our ownership 110%, to not make any profit on these, complete pass through. So raw materials pricing has fluctuated, as you might well imagine, with demand going up for some of the materials required to manufacture these products, but we've been able to keep the price fairly steady that we pass on to our medical professionals.
That's phenomenal. It's just an amazing story of kind of, people come in my office all the time and say, I have an idea. And I always find myself getting a little nervous about what that idea is going to be, but it's amazing how that one conversation can lead to some change and some really needed equipment. When you look at your role as a CEO and kind of the importance of leadership, can you talk a little bit about how important it's been for you to learn from mistakes, or learn from kind of initiatives that maybe didn't go as well as you've imported, as well as you originally tried? A lot of what we try and talk about at St. John's and really encourage our students is to have a growth mindset of really looking at mistakes and things that don't work out the way we want as opportunities to learn, not as failures.
Yeah, that's a great call. And, when we just from an overall, talent acquisition philosophy that we have, we put as much premium on, EQ, emotional intelligence, as we do IQ, because of the team environment and the philosophy that we operate in. We have several different kind of guiding principles that we conduct ourselves with. One, which I think is one of the most important, is the best idea wins. I don't care if it comes from a first-year employee or a vice president. We need to foster a very flat, non-hierarchical approach to idea generation, and it's worked really well. So we encourage risk-taking. We do not punish people for making mistakes. In fact, we encourage it. Our point of view is that if you try to outdo something that already exists in the marketplace, you're going to have a hard time really making an impact. So it's really the novel and unconventional thinking that really moves the needle, and that's what we build our entire kind of employee performance management process around.
It's great. It sounds like a great place for a prep grad who really masters the growth mindset concept of kind of being able to make mistakes and to learn from those. I just want to remind the students that are listening is in a couple minutes, we're going to open things up to questions. So if you are viewing the webinar or participating on your iPad or an iPhone, at the top of your screen, you'll see a question mark, and you can use that question mark to submit questions that you have for Ed, and they'll come to me and I'll share them. If you are on a desktop, there's a feature over to the right that says questions. Just click on that and you can type your question in. Ed, as you look at, we have a group of young men who are at a pretty good high school. I'm a little biased, that are going to kind of do some great things when they graduate. Some of them are going to look to be CEOs and look to be in leadership. What advice can you give them as they are kind of journeying through, some of our students in middle school, journeying through high school, of what's the best thing that they can do to help prepare themselves to be a leader in the changing and disruptive times that we live in, knowing that in some ways, kind of, some people would argue that COVID-19 and coronavirus, we may not get back to quote unquote normal, but what insights and advice do you have for our students?
Well, I would say the most important, if I were to write a book about my career, which I'll never do because nobody would buy it, I would say that I was incredibly fortunate to work for some really good people early in my career that encouraged me culturally to take some risks and to challenge the status quo, frankly. Worked for Nike for a number of years back when the company was, just kind of scale, $500 million business, where today they're, I think 43 billion. So from a scale perspective, I was there early, and it was a very rebellious culture, and they were creating a category and a business that really didn't exist in the 80s. So I would encourage people you hear all the time about following your passion, but I think more than anything, get yourself in a situation where you're working with people and for people that have your best interest in heart and encourage you to grow yourself as opposed to just execute for them.
That's great. That's great advice. You're a prep parent. I get to be a headmaster as well as the parent of two kids, and probably if your situation's anything like mine, my kids sometimes listen to me as a headmaster, but don't always listen to me as a parent. What advice would you give to students, kind of just in general, as a parent, and maybe even to some of our seniors who I know are frustrated by what's going on right now, and kind of the impact it's going to have on kind of the end of the year. But as we're challenged by adversity and challenged by some things that we don't have control over, what insights do you have that you could share about kind of overcoming obstacles as a parent and as a CEO?
Yeah, I think, certainly from a CEO, one of the things that we talk about all the time culturally is that we hire people with an athletic mindset, and not necessarily just from the fact that we're a sports company, but also from how they approach things. And the notion of looking at whether it's your competitors or difficult situations as competitions and trying to overcome them, that's really what, athletics teaches people. Look, do I think we're going to get through this? Absolutely. Do I believe that the world's going to look a little bit different afterwards? I do. Do I think it's a significant wake-up call for society and the government and everybody else? 100%. But the common thread through all of that is, what can we learn? What can we take away? And how can we make sure that if anything ever happens like this again, that we're better prepared? So the advice I would give is, hopefully this is a once in a lifetime situation, but being exposed to it and coming through it is as valuable a lesson as you're going to ever experience, both as a parent or as a CEO.
Sure. It's interesting, as you say, talk about hiring for an athletic mindset. We've talked a lot about that with regard to the faculty that we hire in some ways, knowing that, I think we've been really impressed a number of times to see our student athletes out there when kind of the chips are down and they're facing an obstacle, whether it's a lopsided score or they're losing a game they're supposed to win, or just kind of overcoming adversity. It's really impressive to see a team work together to focus on a common goal, and to see how kind of a lot of times the identity of a good team is when the teammates aren't focused on it's a we versus me focus. And I think that's a big thing that works for us at St. John's as well, focusing on the we and the community as opposed to just the me.
100%.
Great. So a couple questions have come in from our students. When you look at the research and development that's going on at Bauer, how is your company kind of looking at different opportunities for research and development, and how are you putting those dollars to work as a way to kind of improve products and kind of meet the needs of the athletes that you're equipping out there?
Yeah, so we have about 150,000 square foot RD&D center just outside of Montreal in Quebec. That team there is responsible for creating kind of a 4-year innovation pipeline. So as it sits today, they're still working on products that won't see the market for a number of years. It is, as I like to tell people, it is absolutely the lifeblood of our company. We overspend in RD&D to stay ahead of the competition. We spend an awful lot of money per year on legal counsel for protecting our IP, filing for new IP, and we over-index in the number of resources we have in the RD&D department. You can have all the greatest marketing you want in the world. You can have the best website in the world. If you don't have product, it's not going to work. Whether it's lacrosse, baseball, or hockey, these are incredibly competitive sports. We want to make sure that our products not only live up to, but exceed the expectations of the world's best athletes. So we can't spend enough, frankly, through the lens of product innovation. And we've got some things on the drawing board which are going to blow some people away. So I'm highly confident of our future, certainly over the next 4 or 5 years.
That's great. It's and one of our budding entrepreneurs has asked, maybe it's an entrepreneur or a future R&D person, is when you're looking at stuff in your R&D, is it just stuff that your staff are doing, or do you buy patents that people from the outside pitch to you? Is there an opportunity for people to kind of that aren't current Bauer employees to pitch concepts to you?
There absolutely is. We have a process for that. We don't acquire them a lot, but there are cases where we will do it, whether the product itself or some of the underlying intellectual property behind a particular product.
Great. A couple of our students, when you were talking earlier and talking about kind of the different markets that you're in, there are a few surprised that Bauer does a lot of work in Asia. Can you talk about kind of what's going on in Asia with regard to hockey in general and different sports that you're involved in, and what you see happening there, and how you overcome the language barriers and the cultural barriers that there may be that may be there?
Yeah, there's 2 different vectors with regards to Asia. One is the manufacturing vector, which is the most amount of time that I spend over there. We have offshore manufacturing facilities in China, Taiwan, Thailand, a little bit in Indonesia and Vietnam. I would say that China as a resource has gone down as a percentage of our total manufacturing over time, just because it's become very expensive to manufacture there versus what it was 10 years ago. Labor rates have increased at a much higher rate than any other country in Asia, but yet there's still a reason that a lot of sporting goods company and athletic footwear and apparel companies manufacture over there, which is just kind of economies of scale and the ability to bring product to market at a more palatable price to consumers here in North America and other places than there would be. With regards to the consumer market, there's not a ton of hockey in Asia. China is a growing opportunity for us, but it's a long putt. By way of example, China has 1.7 billion people and about 300 ice rinks in the country. Canada has 34 million people and 5,500 ice rinks in Canada. So gives you a little bit of compare and contrast, but yet a lot going on with the Olympics coming up.
Sure.
The next Winter Olympics, a lot of energy that the government's putting behind growth of winter sports there. So we want to make sure that we're well positioned when those consumers really start to get into the sport. We'll be ready.
Great. And then a couple people are asking, you're big in the hockey world right now, manufacturing stuff, and a lot going on with Bauer. Did you play the sport as a kid? Was it something that you've been interested in?
I did play it as a kid. Uh, I was not very good. How's that? I love the sport.
It's a good admission in public.
Yeah, no. I love the sport. I still do. I watch as much as I can at night when the season's going on. I think there's a lot around the sport just from the essence of the sport and the values of the sport that
Sure.
be able to apply to other things in my life, and that I have a lot of respect for, particularly around the notion of team and the notion of respect for everybody, and the idea of blocking a shot and going in a corner and digging a puck out for your teammate.
Right. Right. Despite the fact that somebody's going to come charging into you and doesn't want you to get that puck, and being committed to others is pretty impressive.
If it's for the greater good, then it's okay.
There you go. So one of our goalies, he'll remain nameless, has a specific product development question for you, and I don't really understand the question, but the question is, are there any plans for a goalie ADV stick? Not that we're trying to scoop anything, but I just want to put that question out there from one of our student athletes.
I'll give you the Apple official response. We don't comment on future products. But I'll also tell you, stay tuned.
All right, that sounds good. A question from one of our parents and a couple others along the same ideas of, when you look at your leadership, and we talked a little bit about this, but how do you foster a work environment where you relayed that example of what happened on March 17th when somebody came in, but how do you create a culture and values in a company or an organization where somebody feels comfortable enough to knock on the CEO's door with a suggestion that may seem crazy and hasn't been done before, and not be nervous about being tossed out or fired or whatever else might happen? Can you talk a little bit about cultural leadership?
Yeah, sure. As important as anything else that we do, I have an open door policy, as does everybody on the executive team. That's just a mandate. And like I said, we're making sure that we're hiring the right type of leaders in the company that share the same values. One of the things that we do on an annual basis is, I referenced it earlier, is a performance management system, and it really has two axes, I should say. One is the technical or the functional acumen and how you're doing in your actual job. And the other axis is really how you treat things in the organization. We put as much gravity on how we treat each other as we do on how somebody performs functionally in their job. So we'll very clearly understand that for you to be successful in our company, you be able to work with others, support others, be selfless, and not be afraid to say you're wrong. We have one thing that we don't tolerate at all, which is people trying to take credit for things they didn't do, or people throwing other people under the bus. Those are the two ways, if you want to get walked to the door, those are the two ways that it can happen.
Sounds like a pretty amazing culture and pretty amazing way to treat people in a positive way, and really to have some good innovation. One of our students is asking about, not to get into the political side of things, but there's been a lot of talk about the Defense Production Act and the government kind of looking at different ways to kind of increase production, specifically of PPP and other PPE and other items. And the question is, could you put yourself in the shoes of a CEO operating a business that's really impacted by this kind of legislation, and what your thoughts would be, or how that would go for your business?
Yeah, great question. Well, we're doing as much as we can personally. One of the things that we took a decision to do was, because we were capped just physically on how many people we had to build these, as well as the 2.5 million units that I referenced earlier, we actually had to go offshore to factories in Taiwan and Thailand and ask them to stop making hockey equipment and start making these to supply, in this specific example, the federal government of Canada, Canada Health, that ordered 1 million units by themselves. So we would obviously adapt to the extent possible. And as I said, one of the things because we are capped, we took our designs, the material specs, and the assembly instructions for our masks, and we put them on our website for any other individual or company to download so that they could replicate what we're doing as well.
Well, that's great. It's kind of a open source face mask. That's great.
You have to. The only way this thing, look, we're a small company. We're, just under $600 million in revenue per year, which seems large. We talk about, multinational mega corporations, very small. So we have a limited resource base. The only way for people to get through this crisis with the maximum amount of PPE products is for everybody to step up and lend a hand. So, the call to action for us by putting those instructions on the website was effectively that step. Here you go. We're telling you everything you need to know. Plus, we'll also direct you to some raw material suppliers so that you get your people to work as well.
That's great. That's what a great way to kind of model that servant leadership. Two last questions for you, Ed. I know you got a lot going on, and we promised a half an hour. So one of the questions came in, I think, from another one of our hockey players, of kind of looking at what challenge does Bauer face as new safety guidelines are put into effect? I guess within the world, the hockey world, and NHL. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, with the players being so big, so fast, so strong, we're constantly trying to upgrade our protection. The trick is, and this is if you have any hockey players on this, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. If you go into a retail store and buy a pair of shoulder pads, they're really protective. If you walked into the Boston Bruins locker room and you saw what those pro players wear for shoulder pads, they're wearing products from about 20 years ago with a lot less protection because they want the mobility. So we're, the constant struggle for us is making sure that we're not overbuilding product that would cause people not to buy it, as opposed to making sure that we're adhering to, in some categories, there are regulatory standards with regards to protection, like helmets. In other categories, there are standards around certain pieces in locations of it. But it's a constant balance between lightweight mobility and protection. But it's something that's not going to go away, particularly with athletes getting as quick and as strong as they are.
Sure, that's great. If we look at, I'll combine the two last questions for the last one of kind of looking at what book would you recommend our students to kind of look at for leadership or kind of as something that had a formative impact for you, and knowing that in the world of being a CEO, there's a lot of demands on your time and probably don't have as much time to read or do the leader stuff you'd like. What does a normal day look like for you in your day-to-day work?
Well, from a book, I'd ask people to check out a book called Leading by Alex Ferguson. For those soccer players that may be watching this, they know who Sir Alex Ferguson is. Legendary coach from Great Britain, but he has some very interesting insights which combines, coaching an athletic team and also business leadership, and it was eye-opening for me. I'd suggest that strongly. I think, just from a day-to-day perspective, my advice to people is listen a heck of a lot more than you talk. Listen to what people are saying, not only your customers, but your employees. Your employees are that's the most valuable asset. Never shows up on a balance sheet, doesn't show up in a P&L, but you have to make sure that the people that you work with feel like they're being supported, feel like they're being empowered, and feel like they have the runway to be successful.
Ed, I really appreciate your time. I know that there's a lot going on in your world. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, your support as a parent of St. John's. I'm glad that we were able to have an impact on you for a couple of years when you were a student there, and appreciate your willingness to be a part of this with our students. It's a great opportunity for them to take some of the extra time they may have found themselves with and learn from somebody who's done some phenomenal work. And thank you for what you've done and saying yes to that employee on March 17th. It's pretty amazing and a phenomenal example of agility, innovation, and servant leadership. I really appreciate your time, Ed.
Well, listen, thank you. I think my stepson Russell, who goes to the prep, has developed into quite a strong young man with his experience there. One gripe is that as much as St. John's has developed him, he still can't figure out where the dishwasher is. So going forward, if you want to put that into the curriculum, I think a lot of parents would be super supportive of that.
I think under remote learning and homeschooling, I think pushing this on to all of our students, I'm happy to have the dean of students give him a call and kind of we can arrange some detentions to make sure he gets the dishes done.
He'd appreciate that.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Ed.
Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it. And for all of our students, just know that there's another session of Live Since You Asked taking place on Thursday of this week at 3 o'clock. And we'll be talking with Pat Connaughton, class of 2011, part of the NBA and on the Milwaukee Bucks. So thanks everybody for joining us. Ed, thank you again for your time. Stay healthy, stay well, everybody. And really looking forward to the day that we're all able to come back on campus. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.